Welcome to Ladies Talk Show. This is your host, Leah Richheimer from Yerushalayim. Yay! So I just wanted to tell you how lucky we are to have Sara Yoheved Rigler speaking to us today about a very, very holy woman. I read this book. It really shifted my whole thinking of what is possible for a woman to be, to fulfill our shleimus in this world. And I'm so grateful. Thank you. Welcome on the show, and thank you so much for being with us.
Well, I'm very happy to be with all of you, Leah. This book was a phenomenon. It came out 19 years ago. I was an unknown author, and I was writing about an unknown holy woman, because she was a hidden holy woman, Rebbetzin Sara Kramer. The book is called Holy Woman, and 2 weeks after it came out, it was published by Art Scroll. I got a call from New York where they said, we're bringing out a second printing. Do you have any changes? Second printing book just came out. What are you talking about? And it went through 9 printings in the first year, and it was a total phenomenon. We're approaching her 20th yard site. So there's a whole new generation of women who didn't read Hollywood. The main thing isn't how many people read the book then, but how many people's lives were changed by reading the book. Because the book was meant to be not a straight biography. The book was meant to be a book on how you too can become spiritually great. And in order to do that, I'll show you the device that I use throughout the book. Throughout the book, I have this sorry, Zoom is always backwards. This fork in the road icon where I'm telling the story of her life, and then I switch the font, and you have this fork in the road icon where she came to a choice. Because the main point about the book is that she had many choices in her life. She became so great. But we can all become great. We can all become great by making choices in our lives, because we all have choices. So we're not on her level, but we all have similar choices on whatever level we're on. And by making our choices right, we can also fulfill our own spiritual potential and become great spiritually. That was the thrust of the book. And that's what I want to talk about.
And I loved it. So maybe you could start off, especially people who aren't familiar. For those of you who are familiar and have read the book, which is probably most of everybody, whatever, Holy Woman, this will bring that same, the purpose of this show is to bring this chizuk back into you. Maybe you'll tell us a story from Sara Kramer that can, get people just a little bit of a taste.
So to give you just a slight background, she was born in 1924 in the Carpathian Mountains, near what was called, big city was Munkach. And of course the Holocaust came along when she was, gradually, Hungary kept the Nazis. Hungary was an ally of the Nazis, but they wouldn't let the Nazis in to round up the Jews until March of 1944. So her family was rounded up at that point. She was 20 years old, and the whole family was taken to Auschwitz. Her parents, her older sister, her nieces and nephews were killed that first night, sent right to the gas chambers. She and her sister Razel were kept alive to be experimented on by Dr. Mengele, the notorious angel of death. And then when they were finished with that, they were sent to work, and they were building a fake waterfall for the garden of one of the Nazi commanders. And Razel dropped a rock, and the Nazi who was guarding them just simply put a gun to her head and killed her. So when the Russians liberated Auschwitz in January of 1945, Sara was the only living member of her family. There were no other survivors of her family, and she made her way. It's all in the book, but bottom line, she made her way to Palestine in 1946, and she married Rav Yaakov Moshe Kramer, who was also a Holocaust survivor and known among those who know things like that as one of the 36 hidden tzaddikim, Lamed Vav tzaddikim, whose merit sustains the world. I believe she was also one of the Lamed Vav, one of the 36 Tzaddikim whose merit sustains the world, but they're hidden. That's the whole thing of them. Anyway, fast forward, I came to Israel in 1985. I had spent 15 years as a monastic member of a Hindu ashram. And then I was introduced to Judaism. You can read all about it. I have a book called God Winked, 12 lessons from my spiritual adventures. So anyway, I came to Israel in 1985, the summer to start learning Judaism, to start learning Torah. And I met somebody who was writing a spiritual guide to Eretz Yisrael, and they wanted me to write a chapter on holy women. And I was like, oh, great. I'd love to write a chapter on holy women. Where do I find them? So, that's the point. They're not so out there. So, so someone told me about Rebbetzin Sara Kramer, who lived in this ramshackle religious moshav in the Jezreel Valley, which is north central Israel. So I went. I took the bus, 2 buses or so, and I went, and it was coordinated that I would get to speak to her on Shabbat afternoon at third meal. Her husband was not around. It was not there. He wasn't in the country at that time. So skipping through a lot, everything is in the book. I went to her for third meal, and I was always very obsessed with the Holocaust. So I asked her about Auschwitz and about her experience in the Holocaust. I mean, I knew somewhat the story, but then she said to me words that completely turned my head around on my shoulders. She said that, and it's been misquoted. People misquote this. And I want to make it very clear what she said. She said Auschwitz was not a bad place. She said she was with a group of religious girls, and whatever mitzvot they could keep, they did keep. A bad place, in other words, they kept track of which day was Shabbat, and they tried to refrain from whatever they could refrain from without getting killed. They said brachas over their food, whatever, however meager it was. She said Auschwitz was not a bad place. She didn't say it was a good place. She said it's not a bad place. She said a bad place is a place where Jews can keep mitzvot and don't keep mitzvot. And then she looked at me and she said, for you, the ashram was a bad place, for you. And what I understood from this was suddenly what? In other words, I think most of us, I think all of us, we define a bad place as a place where bad things happen to you. We define a bad day as a day when bad things happen to you. We define a bad situation as a situation in which bad things happen to you. And she was saying, no, bad and good have nothing to do with what happens to you. They have to do with what comes out of you. So I put this in, it completely switched my whole consciousness, into what I call in my teaching, I call the input pipe. It's there's 2 pipes. Imagine there's 2 pipes connected to you. One pipe is the inflow pipe, which is everything that happens to you from outside, from other people, from situations, from your finances, from your job, whatever, from your marriage, whatever happens to you is the inflow pipe, including if you get sick. Because the outflow pipe are your own thoughts, words, and actions. Your own thoughts, words, and actions are the outflow pipe. Anything that isn't your own thoughts, words, and actions is the inflow pipe. Now, here's the rub. You have 100% control over the outflow pipe, and you have 0% control over the inflow pipe. What happens to you, which is what we're always trying to change, what happens to us, we have 0 control over. That's from Hashem, that's from God. But what the outflow pipe, my own thoughts, words, and actions, I have 100% control over. So that's what she taught me the very first day I met her. That good and bad have to do not with what happens to you, because you can't control that, but with your own thoughts, words, and actions.
I can understand words and actions. Thoughts, I have a little bit more, how do you, explain that to us. Walk us through step by step. How do you control your thoughts? Because you're reacting, or you have a trigger from your childhood or whatever it is. How do you control your thoughts?
So that's a very important question, because the fact is the Torah commands us in things, obviously, mostly actions, also speech. We're not allowed to speak negative, true things. And we're also certainly not allowed to speak false things. But the Torah also has some commandments about thoughts and emotions. We're not allowed to hate our brother in our heart. What if we do? I hate him. He hurt me. I hate him. So the Torah does expect us to take control of our thoughts, because the truth is, if we don't control our thoughts dictate our emotions. There's the word in Hebrew for king is melech, mem, lamed, chaf, melech. So the rabbis teach us that's an acronym for moach, which means brain or mind, lev, which means heart, klayim, which means kidneys, which means the body. If you have rulership in your life, if you're a master of your own life, as opposed to being a slave to being reactivity, if you're a master of your own life, your mind tells your heart what to feel, and your heart tells your body what to do. That's melech, moach, lev, klayim. But if you're not in mastery of your own life, then your heart is telling your mind what to think. and this messes us up all the time, because we want to be masters of our life. We want to be somebody who is in control of.
I get that intellectually, but I can't, and we've got questions coming in also, but I get that intellectually, but I don't understand what the process is of how a person can make a difference in their own thought process. So can you walk us through that nakuda, the little, a little part that explains how to master that?
So let's say, I mean, this is, ladies' talk show is mostly about marriage. Should I give an example from marriage?
Please, yeah.
So let's say your husband does something. I give a weekly webinar on Jewish workshops called the Kesher Wife Club, and to married Jewish women. And the assumption is always that our husbands are wrong, because you don't have to pay money and put time and effort into, I give constantly tools for working on yourself and on your marriage, and you don't have to spend the time and the effort and the money if your husband is right. So the assumption is always your husband is wrong. Okay, so so here your husband did something wrong, as husbands are wont to do, and how do you respond to that? So you could respond by criticizing him, or telling him what he did wrong. Now, what's going to happen? Is that going to lead him to say, oh, I didn't realize I did something wrong. I'm going to change. I'll never do that again.
Good luck with that.
Nobody ever changes from criticism. And we can repeat this pattern for years, for decades. I have women in my Kesher Wife Club who've been married for over 45 years. Okay. So for years and years, you can repeat this. Your husband does something wrong, I'm going to criticize him. Does it improve things? No. Does it get him to stop doing whatever he's doing? No. What does it do? It just makes him feel estranged from you. It makes him want to respond like taking revenge on you. Well, okay, so if what about what you did wrong? He'll find something that you did wrong. And it creates disharmony in your marriage, and it doesn't accomplish anything positive.
What's the fix?
So the fix is to decide that when my husband does something wrong, I call it the three sins. The three sins all start with the letter C: criticizing, correcting, and controlling. So the first thing when a person joins the Kesher Wife Club is she has to work on not criticizing, correcting, and controlling. So once you recognize that this is, again, the whole thrust of this book is the choice part. We have to understand that we have multiple choices in our lives, like she did.
Can you read us one of those parts? One of those, I remember those. Now it's like
here's the choice icon over here. So
Okay.
when you realize you have a choice. In other words, your husband does something wrong, your instinct is
Gut reaction, right?
But animals act from instinct. We don't have to be animals. We're intelligent people. If we see something doesn't work, we can choose to do it differently. So I'll read you an example from the book that has to do with Shalom Bias, with her marital thing. So the thing about her, about Rebbetzin Sara Kramer, is she was a very feisty child. She was born with a quick temper, and she was very feisty. And her mother, she told me once, she was a child. Her mother was a very kind and patient person. Her father, who was redheaded, I don't know if am I speaking next? He was very feisty, a very hot temper. She was like her father, but she wanted to be like her mother. It was a choice she made. She wanted to be like her mother. So once her mother would do all this chesed, all these acts of kindness, take food to neighbors who needed it. Her mother was on her way to taking food once to somebody, and she saw little Sara hitting one of the non-Jewish neighbors. There were very few Jews in this village, mostly non-Jews, hitting one of the non-Jewish kids with a stick. And her mother said, "No, don't do that." And she said, "Well, she hit me first." And she said, "Yes, but you shouldn't hit back." And she said she's Ukrainian. If I don't hit her back, she'll keep hitting me. It's like I have to defend myself. Most of the people in the village were Ukrainians, although it was at that Czechoslovakia where she lived. Anyway, there was a lot of anti-Semitism in her village. Anyway, so she worked on herself to change herself. But she married a man who was like her mother, very calm and loving, forgiving, patient. So here is one of those scenes of choice, of fork in the road choice. Because she got married, she was 23 years old, 3 years after, 22 years old. She had gotten out of Auschwitz like a year and a half before. Here's the choice in the road. Here's her choice. Whenever she disagreed with her husband, Sara chose marital harmony over victory. Because she was strong-willed with definite opinions, the practice of what's called vatranas, or means submission, was a constant challenge to her. Now, her husband also submitted to her. By modern standards, they had a surprisingly liberated, quote unquote, marriage. He made the beds for guests and he cooked when she was busy taking care of Handy. They never had any children of their own, but for 20 years, she took care of multiply handicapped children without any pay, any vacation, and any days off. And she also did most of the physical labor on the farm. When people came seeking Rav Yaakov Moshe's advice, he invited Sara to sit at the table with them, and she often offered her opinion, and Yaakov Moshe never publicly contradicted her. One veteran resident of their village testified his respect for her was ad hashamayim, means sky high. Okay, in most areas, however, she submitted to him, not only because she considered him wiser, which she did, but also because she understood that as the Baal Shem Tov taught, submission is the first step in spiritual growth. In a society that equates submission with weakness and capitulation, it's not surprising that more than half of all marriages end in divorce. For Sara, submission was a daily, sometimes hourly choice. I once asked her, this is a really great story. I once asked her how she had succeeded in overcoming anger. In a rare glimpse into the inner workings of her spiritual life, she told me, I submitted a lot. Over the decades, she became so habituated to vatranas, submission, that she came to regard it as the most efficacious course of action. Once in a conversation about vatranas, submission, I commented that it's hard to give in. Why? The Septuagint, she was in her 70s at that point. The Rebbetzin asked me in surprise. I laughed. Why? I laughed, because it's hard to give in, I said to her. Rebbetzin Sapora Heller, who was present, broke our standoff by explaining. It's hard to give in because a person thinks he's right. The Rebbetzin rejoined, even if he's right, he can still give in. She saw no contradiction. Then she continued, I love to give in more than to argue. Discord breaks a person. My husband used to say, her husband was already gone by that point, a vatran, somebody who gives in, lives abundantly. It's much better to give in than to argue. Rebbetzin Heller, expressing the contemporary Western mindset, remarked, people are afraid that if they give in once, they'll have to give in over and over again. Rebbetzin Chaya Sara assumed her, so what expression? It's nothing, she insisted, even if one gives in over and over again. The measure of her success in Vatranas is that while she and her husband disagreed over many issues, they were so different. In 44 years of marriage, they never had a single argument. So that's how
Hello.
I did it.
Well, okay, let's take a question. This is Gavaldik. Gavaldik, it's a life lesson. Go. Debbie, what's the question? Ask the first question. Go ahead.
Okay, Panina's asking, there are so many things to learn from this book. Can you pinpoint one small thing I can do today to become a greater person?
You realize that you have choices in your life and you'll become the person you choose to be by making the choices, because you have an outflow pipe and an inflow pipe. And no matter what happens to you, no matter how people talk to you, no matter what your husband does, you can choose the thoughts, words, and actions that will make you great.
That's great. Okay, next question. These are great. Go ahead, Debbie.
Okay,
They're all coming in. Go ahead.
Okay, Shira is asking, I get so empowered to be a great person, but life wears me down and I don't act on the inspiration. Any tips to keep the inspiration alive?
So first of all, you have to know that failure is the Yetzer Hara's greatest trick. The Chazal say, a tzaddik falls 7 times and rises again, meaning it's not that a tzaddik only falls 7 times. It means if every time you fall, you rise up again, you will become a tzaddik. So there are examples in the book of times she fell, times that she made mistakes. There was a time, people started to recognize them and they would come and they had all these visitors and she was working all the time. And at one point, they just had a bunch of visitors, they left and a new bunch came and her husband asked her to make a meal and another meal. And she said, she'll make omelet. She'll make omelets. And he said, that's not a respectable meal for our guests. He wanted chicken, to make a proper chicken meal. And he said, never mind. I see you're tired. I'll make the meal. And an hour later, she fell in the house and broke her arm. And she said to me, because I interviewed her in her lifetime, she said to me, she broke her arm because she had failed the test. The test was that even though she was tired, she should have made the chicken for the guests. So she failed that test. So does that mean she then gives up? Oh, okay, that's it. I'll never be great. No, every time you fail, you get up, you brush yourself off, and you keep on going. That's how you become a tzaddik.
Valdik. Okay, go, Debbie. Do we have time for another one? Yeah? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, Chevy's saying, I like pretty things and I feel like Hashem made women into aesthetics for a reason. How does this fit in with the Rebbetzins' simple home and simple way of living?
So this was not something that she ever wanted to be a model for other people. I go into the reasons why they live so simply. He collected a lot of tzedakah money. He didn't want any accusation that they were using it for themselves. They lived very bare bones. But she saw everybody else as a tzaddik. I mean, I was a normal person. I came to her, with my jewelry, She had given away her jewelry, but she called me a tzaddik all the time. I came to her, I was barely 2 months religious. I was barely Shomer Shabbat, and she called me a tzaddikus. I brought my mother to her, who was not Shomer Shabbat. She called her a tzaddikus. Don't cut yourself short. Okay, you like pretty things? Fine, have pretty things. Are there times in your life that will come up when it's a choice between you having a luxury or giving more tzedakah to somebody who really needs it? Yes, those times will come up. And at such times, passing the test looks like, giving that money to the person who really needs it rather than buying yourself that luxury. The test will come up, but that doesn't mean that you should live at her bare bones level. I want to say, because we're at the end, her yard site is, her 20th yard site is Gimel Sivan, which is the 30th of May. And on the night of the 29th of May, anybody who's been inspired by this recording should please light a yard site candle for Rebbetzin Sara Bas Mendel Yosef, because she had no children. And she was worried at the end of her life, when she dies, who will light a candle for me? And I am determined that thousands of women will light a candle for her, because they have been inspired by her spiritual legacy, even though she left behind no physical children. So please light a candle for her on the night of the 29th of May, Rebbetzin Sara Bas Mendel Yosef.
Can you, men, can you please lift up the book again so people can just take and make it?
And read the book. If you haven't, it's a great book to give as a gift for a bas mitzvah present. And if you haven't read it, read it. It'll change your life.
It really will. It's very special. Thank you so much for sharing her life with us and the stories and the chizuk and direction and how we can be more like her. Thank you so much for being with us.
You're very welcome.
This is Leah Richheimer for the Ladies Talk Show. Thank you so much for being with us. And your homework this week is to do one thing, to hopefully light a candle, and also to when you have a choice and you're in the middle of a situation and you're not sure what to do, take the higher road. Mevater. Good luck. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week.